At 6:17 on Friday evening, the last folding chair in the university auditorium was occupied by a stranger. I knew because I had been watching the doors for 23 minutes. Every time they opened, cold air pushed into the room and lifted the edge of the cream program, resting on my lap. Every time, I looked up, expecting to see Graham. He was supposed to be wearing the navy jacket I had laid across the back of our kitchen chair that morning. He was supposed to carry the small bouquet he had ordered 3 days earlier, after I reminded him that flowers needed to be reserved before graduation weekend. He was supposed to sit in Section C, Row 8, Seat 14. Instead, a woman with silver braids took the seat beside my mother and folded her coat across her knees. My mother turned around and found me 6 rows behind her with the other graduates. She did not ask where Graham was. She only pressed her lips together and gave me a small nod. The auditorium lights dimmed at 6:20. My phone remained blank. No missed call, no message, no explanation. The dean stepped onto the stage and began talking about endurance, service, and the responsibility that came with advanced education. Around me, gowns rustled. Someone's family shouted a name from the balcony. A baby started crying near the west exit. I placed my phone face down beneath my program. I had imagined this evening for 3 years. Not the speeches, not the photographs, not even the diploma. I had imagined turning toward Graham after my name was called and seeing that he understood what it had taken to get there. I had completed my master's degree in transportation planning while working 45 hours a week for the Municipal Development Office in Bellwether. I had studied traffic flow models at our dining table after midnight. I had taken conference calls from parking lots. I had written my thesis during the 8 weeks my father was recovering from heart surgery. Graham had seen all of it. He had stepped around my books. He had complained about the light from my laptop. He had eaten the dinners I prepared on Sundays, so neither of us would need to cook during the week. He knew the date, May 22. It was printed on the refrigerator calendar in thick blue marker. It was saved in his phone. It was written on the invitation I had handed him in February. He had forgotten anyway. When my name was called at 7:11, I crossed the stage alone. The dean shook my hand. The photographer's flash reflected against the polished floor. I heard my mother and father cheering from Section C. I did not look toward Seat 14. I already knew it was empty. After the ceremony, the graduates gathered beneath the glass atrium outside the auditorium. The air smelled like wet pavement and cut flowers. Families crowded around banners and stone columns, taking photographs beneath the university crest. My mother found me first. She wrapped both arms around me and held on longer than usual. My father kissed my forehead. He had brought a gift bag with white tissue paper and a small silver compass attached to the handle. He said it was for the planner who finally learned she could choose her own direction. I smiled because he was trying to make me laugh. My mother looked behind me. She asked whether Graham had called. I said, "Not yet." She did not say anything else. That was worse than anger. At 7:34, my phone vibrated. For 1 second, my body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders dropped. My hand tightened around the phone. It was not Graham. It was an email from Meridian Transit Collaborative. The subject line read, "Final offer, Regional Mobility Director." I had interviewed with them 4 weeks earlier. The position was in Larkspur Bay, more than 2,000 miles west of Bellwether. I had not told Graham about the final interview. I had planned to tell him that night, after the ceremony, when we were seated at the restaurant he had promised to book. I opened the email beneath the university's stone archway, while my parents waited beside me. The offer was better than I expected, a salary of $142,000, a relocation package, temporary housing for 90 days, authority over a 14-person planning team, a start date of July 6. The acceptance deadline was Monday at noon. My mother asked whether everything was all right. I looked at the empty chair visible through the auditorium's glass doors. Then I looked back at the offer. I said yes. For the first time that evening, I meant it. Graham and I had been together for 7 years. We met when I was 24 and he was 27, at a neighborhood fundraiser for a pedestrian bridge that never got built. I was standing beside a scale model of the proposed design when he asked why the bridge curved instead of running straight across the river. I explained that the curve reduced the grade and made it accessible for wheelchairs and bicycles. He listened closely. That was one of the first things I loved about him. He paid attention when I spoke. Graham owned a small commercial photography company. He photographed restaurants, office buildings, and rental properties. His schedule changed every week. He could work until midnight on Tuesday and sleep until 10 on Thursday. I liked his flexibility. He liked my structure. At least that was what we said in the beginning. I measured rooms before buying furniture. I arrived 15 minutes early. I kept receipts in labeled envelopes. Graham left camera batteries in coat pockets and forgot where he parked. He said we balanced each other. For a while we did. He taught me to take spontaneous weekend trips. I taught him to submit invoices before clients started calling. He made ordinary mornings feel less serious. I made sure the electricity stayed on when he ignored the billing notices. We moved into a rented townhouse after 2 years. It had narrow stairs, uneven floors, and a maple tree outside the bedroom window. The kitchen cabinets were painted a pale green that Graham hated. I loved them because they made the room look calm in the morning. We talked about marriage. We talked about buying a house after I finished graduate school. We talked about moving somewhere warmer one day. The future appeared in our conversations often enough that I mistook repetition for commitment. The first graduation he forgot was my professional certification ceremony. It happened 3 years earlier, 6 months after I started my master's program. The certification was not required for my job, but I had studied for 11 months. The exam lasted 8 hours. Fewer than 60% of applicants passed on the first attempt. The ceremony was held at the Civic Design Hall on a Saturday morning. Graham promised he would be there. At 9:05, while I stood in the lobby wearing a charcoal dress, he sent a message asking what time the ceremony started. It had started 5 minutes earlier. He arrived after it ended, with a paper cup of coffee and an apology. He said a client had called unexpectedly. He said he had lost track of time while editing photographs. He said he felt terrible. I believed him. We went to lunch. He ordered champagne. He posted a photograph of me holding the certificate and wrote that he was proud. Everyone who saw it assumed he had watched me receive it. I did not correct them. The second time was not technically a graduation. It was the public defense of my thesis proposal. The university allowed family members and partners to attend. Graham told me he wanted to be there because he had heard me talk about the project for 2 years. The defense was scheduled for 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. At 2:46, he called and said he had agreed to photograph a warehouse 40 miles away. He said he thought my defense was on Thursday. I stood in the hallway outside the faculty conference room and listened to him search through his calendar. He said I wrote it down wrong. I said I sent you the invitation. He said I know. I'm sorry. I turned off my phone and walked into the room. I passed. My advisor, Dr. Ansel, shook my hand afterward and told me my research had the potential to change how mid-sized cities designed bus corridors. I went home carrying a bottle of sparkling cider someone from the department had given me. Graham was asleep on the couch. A takeout container sat open on the coffee table. He woke when I placed my bag on the floor. He asked how it went. I said, I passed. He smiled and said he knew I would. Then he asked whether I had remembered to buy laundry detergent. That night, I told myself he was not cruel. That mattered to me. Graham was never cruel. He did not call me names. He did not tell me to quit school. He did not object when I spent weekends at the library. He simply treated the important parts of my life as events that could be moved, forgotten, or acknowledged later. That distinction allowed me to excuse him for years. By the time I began my final semester, I had learned to manage his attention the way I managed a complicated intersection. I sent reminders. I repeated dates. I confirmed plans. I created calendar invitations. I placed printed notes where he would see them. Each method worked temporarily. Then the pattern returned. Graham remembered client shoots because missing them cost him money. He remembered poker nights because his friends sent messages all afternoon. He remembered his sister's birthday because she called him a week in advance and told him exactly what she wanted. My milestones required me to become both participant and event coordinator. 3 months before graduation, I decided I would not let that happen again. I gave him the date once, February 18th, after dinner. I handed him the printed invitation while he sat at the kitchen table, reviewing photographs from a restaurant opening. He looked at the date and said, May 22, 6:30. I said, graduates need to arrive at 5:30. You and my parents should be seated by 6. He opened his calendar and entered the event. He turned the phone toward me. The words Mara graduation appeared across the screen. He said, there, impossible to forget. I wanted to believe that entering a date into his phone meant something. I wanted to experience one important day without supervising another adult's participation, so I did not remind him again. Not when March ended, not when my gown arrived, not when my mother asked what Graham planned to wear, not when the university emailed the parking instructions. I forwarded the instructions to him without comment. He replied with a thumbs up. 2 weeks before graduation, Meridian Transit Collaborative contacted me. I knew the firm by reputation. They handled regional infrastructure projects across 5 western states. Their Larkspur Bay office had recently secured approval for a large coastal mobility project that combined commuter rail, electric buses, protected cycling routes, and flood-resilient street design. I had read the planning documents during my 2nd year of graduate school. The project was ambitious. It was also exactly the kind of work I had spent years preparing to do. The first interview lasted 53 minutes. The second included 3 department leaders and a case study. For the final interview, they asked me to present a 90-day strategy for reorganizing a corridor that had failed 2 previous environmental reviews. I spent 6 nights building the presentation. Graham assumed I was finishing my thesis revisions. I did not correct him. That was unusual for me. I normally told him everything. I told him when a meeting went well, when my supervisor frustrated me, when my father's test results came back normal, when I found a new coffee shop near the office. But the Meridian opportunity felt too important to expose to his casual response. I did not want to hear him say that Larkspur Bay was far away before anyone had offered me the job. I did not want him to joke about how I would hate the humidity or how expensive moving would be. I did not want to watch him turn my possibility into an inconvenience, so I kept it private. The final interview took place on a Monday morning at 7 o'clock because of the time difference. I wore a white blouse and sat at the dining table with my laptop angled toward the blank wall. Graham entered the kitchen halfway through. He opened the refrigerator, stared inside, and asked whether we had any orange juice. I muted the microphone. I told him it was on the bottom shelf. He found it and walked away. No one on the interview panel commented. Afterward, I closed the laptop and sat in silence for several minutes. I had presented well. I knew it. I could tell by the questions they asked near the end. They had moved beyond my qualifications and started discussing what support I would need to relocate. Graham came downstairs again at 8:12. He asked whether I wanted eggs. I said no. He did not ask about the meeting. That should have made it easier to tell him. Instead, it confirmed why I had not. On graduation morning, I woke at 5:48. Rain tapped against the bedroom window. Graham was asleep on his stomach with one arm beneath the pillow. I showered, dried my hair, and pressed my dress. At 7:15, I placed his navy jacket over the kitchen chair. He came downstairs at 8:03 wearing gray sweatpants. He looked at the garment bag hanging near the door and asked whether I had a department dinner. I waited. I gave him time to remember. His face remained blank. Then he looked at the calendar on the refrigerator. He said, right, graduation. I watched recognition arrive slowly, as though the date belonged to someone he barely knew. He walked over and kissed my cheek. He said he had a photography job at noon, but it would only take 2 hours. I asked where. He said a new fitness studio, near the North Industrial District. The Industrial District was 30 minutes from the university. I asked whether he would have enough time. He said easily. I told him the doors closed at 6:15. He said he would be there by 6. That was the last conversation we had before the ceremony. At 4:40, while I stood in front of the bathroom mirror fastening my earrings, Graham sent a message. The client wanted additional photographs. He said he might be a little late. I stared at the words. Then I typed that the ceremony started at 6:30 and the doors closed at 6:15. He replied that he knew. At 5:12, my mother picked me up. Graham's jacket remained on the kitchen chair. I looked at it before closing the door. I could have called him. I could have told him to leave the job. I could have explained, again, that this mattered. I did none of those things. I had spent 7 years designing routes around his carelessness. That evening, I decided to see where his chosen route led. It led to an empty chair. After the ceremony, my parents took me to dinner. The restaurant reservation Graham had promised to make did not exist. My father called a small Italian place near the river, and they found us a table beside the kitchen. I sat between my parents wearing my graduation dress beneath the open gown. My diploma folder rested on the empty chair beside me. At 8:06, Graham called. I let it ring. At 8:09, he called again. My mother looked at the phone but did not speak. At 8:12, a message appeared. He said he was outside the auditorium and could not find us. I read it twice. The ceremony had ended almost 40 minutes earlier. I typed that I was having dinner with my parents. He responded immediately. He said, "I thought it went later." I put the phone into my purse. My father reached for the bread basket. My mother asked whether I had decided what to do about the offer. I had shown them the email while we walked to the parking garage. They knew about the interviews. I had told them after the second round. I said I had until Monday. My father cut a piece of bread in half. He said, "That is not what I asked." I understood. He was not asking about the deadline. He was asking whether I wanted the job. I looked down at the tablecloth. There was a small brown stain near my water glass. The silverware did not match. Someone in the kitchen dropped a metal tray. I said yes. My mother's eyes filled, but she smiled. She said, "Then you should take it." I told them it was across the country. My father said, "Maps have roads in both directions." I laughed once. It came out uneven. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. She asked what Graham thought. I said, "He does not know." Neither of them looked surprised. That hurt more than I expected. At 9:27, Graham sent another message. He said he was home. He said he had ordered dessert. He said he wanted to make it up to me. I read the message while the server carried out a slice of lemon cake with a single candle in the center. My parents sang quietly. I blew out the candle. Then I opened the Meridian offer on my phone and pressed accept. The website asked me to confirm. I checked the salary. I checked the start date. I checked the relocation terms. Then I pressed confirm acceptance. A green banner appeared across the screen. "Welcome to Meridian Transit Collaborative." My heart beat hard for several seconds. Not from fear, from recognition. The decision felt large, but it did not feel sudden. It felt like the final calculation in a problem I had been solving for years. When I arrived home at 10:14, every light downstairs was on. Graham sat on the couch wearing the shirt he had used for the photography job. His camera bag was on the floor beside him. 2 white dessert boxes sat on the coffee table. He stood when I entered. He looked at my gown and then at the diploma folder in my hand. He said he was sorry. I placed the folder on the entry table. He came closer. He said the client kept changing the shot list. The studio owner wanted photographs of every machine, then asked for portraits of the trainers. Traffic near the bridge had been terrible. I listened. His explanation was detailed. It always was. Graham could reconstruct every obstacle that prevented him from showing up. He could account for every minute except the ones when he could have chosen differently. I asked when he realized he would miss the ceremony. He said he never thought he would miss it entirely. I asked when he left the studio. He looked toward the camera bag. He said, around 6:20. The doors had closed at 6:15. He had still been 30 minutes away. I asked whether he had checked the route before accepting additional photographs. He said he thought there was time. I said, you did not forget the time. You decided it would wait for you. He rubbed both hands over his face. He said that was not fair. I removed the graduation gown and folded it over my arm. I said this was the third time. He said the certification ceremony was different. I said, I was there. I remember. He said he had apologized for that. I said, apologies are not attendance. He sat down again. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Rainwater moved through the gutter outside. He looked tired. Not heartbroken, not frightened. Tired, as though my disappointment had become another problem waiting for him after a long workday. He said, I love you, Mara. I made a mistake. I said, you made the same choice again. He asked what I wanted him to do. That question settled something inside me. He had missed the ceremony. He had missed the dinner. He had not reserved the restaurant. He had arrived home with desserts from the grocery store. Now he wanted instructions for repairing the evening. I said, I do not want to manage this for you. He stood again. He said he was trying to fix it. I said, the ceremony is over. He said we could celebrate the next day. I looked at him. He believed that was reasonable. He believed the date was flexible because my achievement would still exist tomorrow. He did not understand that showing up was the gift. I carried my gown upstairs. He followed me. In the bedroom, I hung it inside the closet and removed my earrings. Graham stood in the doorway. He asked why I was acting so calm. I placed the earrings in their box. I said I accepted a job in Larkspur Bay. He did not respond. I watched his face change. First confusion, then calculation, then disbelief. He asked what job. I told him, Regional Mobility Director at Meridian Transit Collaborative. He asked when I had applied. I said 6 weeks ago. He asked why I had not told him. I said I had planned to tell him after graduation. He looked toward the hallway as though the answer might be waiting downstairs. He said, you accepted it tonight. I said, yes. He asked whether I had done it because he missed the ceremony. I considered that carefully. I said, I accepted it tonight because you missing the ceremony made the decision clear. He shook his head. He said I was making a life-changing choice while emotional. I opened the dresser and removed my pajamas. I said the salary was $142,000. The relocation package covered moving expenses and temporary housing. The position had a 6-month performance review and a 2-year project commitment. I had researched the cost of living, tax rates, transit access, and rental markets. He stared at me. I said, this is not an emotional decision. It is the most documented decision I have made in years. He sat on the edge of the bed. He asked where that left us. I said I did not know. That was the only part I had not planned. I had accepted the offer because I wanted the work. I had accepted because Larkspur Bay represented movement. I had accepted because staying in Bellwether had begun to feel like waiting at a signal that would never change. But I had not yet decided whether Graham had a place in the next part of my life. He asked when I would leave. I said July 1. He said that was less than 6 weeks away. I said, I know. He said I could not decide something like that without talking to him. I looked at him in the mirror. I said, you decided not to come tonight without talking to me. He said it was not the same. I said, no, it is not. He stood and walked toward the window. He remained there for a long time. Then he asked whether I expected him to move. I said I expected him to decide what mattered to him without making me build the schedule. He turned around. He said his company was in Bellwether. I said yes. He said his clients were there. I said yes. He said his sister and friends were there. I said yes. He asked whether I understood what I was asking him to give up. I folded my dress over the back of a chair. I said I had not asked him to give up anything. He stared at me. I said, I accepted the offer. That is what I did. What you do is your decision. He called that cold. I did not answer. I went into the bathroom and closed the door. For the first time that day, I cried. I sat on the edge of the bathtub with both hands covering my mouth because I did not want him to hear. The tears lasted less than 5 minutes. Then I washed my face, changed my clothes, and returned to the bedroom. Graham had gone downstairs. I slept alone. The next morning, I woke at 7:02. The rain had stopped. Sunlight filled the room through the maple leaves, making shifting patterns across the wall. Graham's side of the bed had not been used. I found him asleep on the couch beneath a gray blanket. The dessert boxes remained unopened. I made coffee. At 7:35, he came into the kitchen. He looked older than he had the day before. He sat across from me and asked whether I was serious about leaving. I said yes. He asked whether I was ending the relationship. I said I was ending the life we had been planning. He looked down. I said that life depended on me staying in Bellwether, finishing school, taking a modest promotion at the municipal office, and continuing to make room for him. He said he had never asked me to do that. I said he had benefited from it without asking. He did not argue. I opened my laptop and reviewed the offer documents. The relocation coordinator had already sent a welcome packet. Graham watched me. He asked whether we could attend counseling. I said we had discussed counseling the year before. He said he had been busy. I looked up. He closed his eyes. The words had proven my point before I needed to. He said, "That came out wrong." I said, "It came out accurately." He stood and walked to the sink. He rinsed a clean glass. Then he asked whether there was someone else. I said no. He looked relieved. That relief told me he still misunderstood. A different man would have given him a problem he recognized. He could have blamed attraction, secrecy, or betrayal. The truth was harder. I was leaving because of who I had become beside him. I had become a reminder system, a scheduler, a quiet absorber of disappointment. I had become skilled at reducing my needs until they could fit around his attention. There was no one else. There was only a version of myself I wanted back. On Monday morning, Meridian's Human Resources Director called at 9:10. Her name was Celia North. She congratulated me and reviewed the next steps. The company would send a relocation specialist to Bellwether on June 8th. They had reserved a furnished apartment near the Larkspur Bay Transit Center. My first week would include meetings with engineering, public engagement, finance, and environmental review teams. I took notes in a new black notebook. When the call ended, I closed the cover and wrote July 6 on the first page. Graham stood in the doorway. He had listened to part of the conversation. He asked whether there was still time to change my mind. I said no. He asked whether Meridian would let me delay the start date. I said I did not want to delay it. He nodded once. Then he went upstairs. That afternoon, he sent me a calendar invitation. The title was Talk About Larkspur. The time was 7 o'clock that evening. I almost declined it. Instead, I accepted. At 7, we sat at the dining table. For once, Graham had prepared. He had researched Larkspur Bay. He had looked at rental prices, commercial photography markets, and flight schedules back to Bellwether. He had written questions on a sheet of paper. He asked whether I would consider long distance for 6 months. I asked what would happen after 6 months. He said we could evaluate. I said we had been evaluating for 7 years. He looked hurt. I did not enjoy hurting him. That mattered too. There was no satisfaction in watching him understand the consequences. I had loved him. Part of me still did. But love had become disconnected from trust. I trusted Graham to apologize. I trusted him to feel bad. I trusted him to make promises when the cost of his behavior became visible. I did not trust him to remember what mattered when no consequence stood in front of him. He asked whether I believed he had ever supported me. I said yes. He had supported me in ways that were comfortable for him. He made coffee when I studied late. He listened when I complained about professors. He paid more of the rent during the semester when I reduced my work hours. Those things were real. I did not erase them. but he had mistaken passive approval for partnership. I needed more than someone who agreed that my goals were valuable. I needed someone who behaved as though they were. He said, "I can do better." I said, "You might." He asked why that was not enough. I said, "Because you always start doing better after I stop believing you will." He looked at the paper in front of him. The conversation ended at 8:26. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us said anything cruel. That made the end feel more permanent. There was no explosion to recover from, only a clear record. Over the next 2 weeks, I began separating our lives. I contacted the landlord and learned our lease allowed one tenant to leave with 60 days' notice if the remaining tenant qualified financially. Graham did. I transferred the electricity account to his name. I removed my card from the grocery delivery service. I divided the furniture by writing each item on an index card and placing the cards into 2 groups. Graham kept the couch, television, dining table, and bedroom set. I took the desk, 2 lamps, the green armchair, and the framed transit map from my office wall. He told me I could take more. I said the furnished apartment already had what I needed. The relocation company scheduled the movers for June 26. Every practical step made the move more real. Graham grew more attentive. He started coming home before 6. He cooked dinner 3 nights in 1 week. He asked about the coastal mobility project and listened to my answers. He placed my coffee beside my laptop without being asked. For 7 years, I had wanted those small acts. Now they arrived after the deadline. I did not punish him for that. I thanked him. I ate the dinners. I answered his questions. But I did not confuse temporary concentration with permanent change. One evening, he suggested that he could move with me after all. We were standing in the kitchen, wrapping plates in newspaper. He said his photography business could operate anywhere. I asked what had changed. He said losing me had changed things. I pressed tape across the top of a box. I said, "I do not want you to move because you are afraid." He said fear could make people honest. I said it could also make them urgent. He leaned against the counter. He asked whether I wanted him to fight for us. I said, "I wanted you to attend my graduation." He looked away. That was the center of it. Not because the ceremony itself was more important than 7 years, because it revealed the structure of those 7 years in one empty chair. He had known what I wanted. He had agreed it mattered. Then he had allowed something less important to take its place. By June 10th, news of my departure had spread through the municipal office. My supervisor, Helena Ward, organized a farewell lunch. She gave me a framed photograph of the East Bellwether bus corridor before and after our redesign. I had spent 18 months on that project. The first photograph showed cracked pavement, 2 narrow lanes, and bus stops marked only by metal poles. The second showed covered shelters, raised platforms, protected crossings, and a line of young trees. Helena said the project existed because I had refused to accept that inconvenience was unavoidable. I placed the frame inside my office box. Her words stayed with me. For years, I had used that belief professionally. A bad route did not need to remain bad because people had grown used to it. A dangerous crossing did not become acceptable because no one had fixed it yet. Patterns were built. Patterns could be changed. I had simply failed to apply the same principle at home. On June 14th, Graham asked me to meet him at the university. I almost refused. Then he said he wanted to show me something. We arrived just after sunset. The campus was quiet. Summer classes had begun, but most buildings were closed. He led me toward the auditorium. The doors were locked. He stood beneath the stone archway where I had opened the job offer. He had brought flowers, white roses and blue delphinium. He said he knew it was too late. I held the bouquet without knowing what to do with it. He said he had come to the campus twice since graduation. He had sat outside and thought about seat 14. He said, "I kept thinking you would always understand." I waited. He said, "I thought understanding me was the same as being loved by me." The words were plain. They were also true. I felt tears gather, but I did not look away. He said he had treated my patience like an unlimited resource. I said, "It was not." He nodded. Then he told me he had started seeing a counselor. He said he was not telling me to change my decision. He wanted me to know, because he was finally beginning to understand that apologies without changed behavior only transferred the pain back to me. I thanked him for telling me. He asked whether there was any chance for us in the future. I looked through the glass doors at the dark auditorium. Rows of empty chairs were visible beyond the lobby. I said, "I cannot build my next life around a future version of you." He closed his eyes briefly. Then he said, "I know." We stood there for several minutes. Before we left, he asked to take my photograph beneath the archway. I almost said no. Then I handed him my phone. I stood holding the flowers with the university behind me. He took one photograph. No professional lighting, no careful composition, no second attempt. The image was slightly tilted. I kept it. The final 2 weeks passed quickly. Boxes filled the townhouse. My mother came over to help wrap dishes. My father disassembled the desk and labeled every screw. Graham worked in his office during most of it. He gave me space. On June 25th, the night before the movers arrived, we ate dinner on the floor because the dining table had already been cleared. We ordered noodles from the restaurant where we had gone on our second date. Graham remembered my order. Afterward, he brought out the unopened dessert boxes from graduation night. They had been thrown away weeks earlier, but he had bought the same desserts again. One was chocolate cake, the other was lemon tart. He placed a small candle in the lemon tart. He did not sing. He said, "Congratulations, Mara." I said, "Thank you." We ate in silence. At 10:40, I went upstairs and slept in the bed for the final time. Graham remained downstairs. The movers arrived at 8 o'clock the next morning. By noon, everything I was taking had been loaded into a white truck. The townhouse looked larger without my things. Pale rectangles marked the walls where my frames had hung. Dust gathered beneath the space where the desk had stood. I walked through each room once. In the kitchen, the pale green cabinets reflected the afternoon light. Graham stood near the back door. He asked whether I had everything. I checked the list on my phone. 5 boxes of books, 3 wardrobe cartons, 1 desk, 1 chair, 2 lamps, kitchen items, office files, bicycle, framed map. I said yes. He placed a small envelope on the counter. Inside was a printed copy of the photograph from the university archway. On the back, he had written the date, June 14th. Nothing else. I put it inside my bag. He asked whether he could drive me to the airport on July 1. I said my parents were taking me. He nodded. Then he asked whether he could hug me. I said yes. He held me carefully. I could feel his breathing against my shoulder. He said, "I am sorry I forgot." I stepped back. I said, "I know." I did not tell him it was all right. It was not. I did not tell him I forgave him. Forgiveness was not the same as returning. I picked up my bag and left. For 5 days I stayed with my parents. My childhood bedroom had become a storage room years earlier, so I slept on a fold-out sofa in my father's study. I spent the days completing relocation forms and reading Meridian's project reports. At night, I walked through my parents' neighborhood. The streets were wide and quiet. Sprinklers clicked across lawns. Porch lights came on one by one. Graham sent 2 messages. The first said the movers had left a box of my kitchen utensils behind. The second said he would mail it. I replied with my new address. Nothing more. On July 1, I woke at 4:30. My flight departed at 7:15. My mother packed sandwiches even though I told her the airport had food. My father carried my suitcase to the car. The drive took 40 minutes. Dawn appeared behind us as a thin orange line. At the departure's entrance, my mother cried. My father handed me the silver compass from graduation. I had forgotten it was still attached to the gift bag. He had removed it and placed it in a small leather case. He said, "For the planner." I slipped it into my coat pocket. After security, I found my gate and sat beside the window. The aircraft waited on wet pavement beneath a gray sky. At 6:42, Graham sent a message. He said, "Safe flight." I read it. Then I turned off my phone. The plane lifted from Bellwether at 7:28. The city disappeared beneath the clouds. For the first hour, I watched the landscape change through the window. Fields became hills. Hills became wide, dry plains. Later, mountains rose beneath us, their peaks streaked with snow. I thought about the years I had spent believing departure required anger. I had imagined endings as loud things, doors slammed, voices raised, objects packed in the middle of the night. Mine had unfolded through documents, calendar dates, labeled boxes, and one accepted offer. It did not feel less final. When we landed in Larkspur Bay, the local time was 10:16. The air outside the terminal was warm and carried the smell of salt. A driver from the relocation company held a sign with my name. During the ride, I watched palm trees, elevated rail lines, and long rows of bright apartment buildings pass the window. The city was unfamiliar. That did not frighten me. It felt clean. The furnished apartment was on the 12th floor of a building 3 blocks from the transit center. It had white walls, oak floors, and a narrow balcony facing west. My belongings would arrive in 2 days. Until then, the rooms held only the rented furniture and my suitcase. I unpacked my clothes. I placed the framed graduation photograph on the kitchen counter. Then I stood on the balcony. Below me, buses moved through the terminal in precise intervals. Trains entered and departed beneath a curved glass roof. Cyclists crossed the plaza along a green-marked path. Everything was moving. At 6:17 that evening, exactly 4 weeks after I had watched the auditorium doors close, I opened my laptop at the small dining table. An email from Meridian waited in my inbox. Celia had sent my first week schedule. Monday, 8 o'clock, executive briefing. Monday, 10:30, corridor design review. Tuesday, 9 o'clock, environmental coordination. Wednesday, 1 o'clock, community mobility workshop. Every meeting had a location, an agenda, and a confirmed list of attendees. I added each one to my calendar. Then I noticed the date displayed at the top of the screen. July 1, the first day of the life I had chosen. I took the silver compass from my coat pocket and placed it beside the laptop. Its needle trembled for a moment, then it pointed north. Outside, a westbound train left the station and curved toward the coast. I watched until the final car disappeared between the buildings.